Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar on America in One Room, Climate and Energy Discussion Results from a National Deliberative Poll. I'm Chris Field, Director of the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment and organizer for today's event, along with the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, the Stanford Center for Deliberative Democracy, the Stanford Crowdsourced Democracy Team, and Climate Forward. The Woods Institute has been for nearly 20 years Stanford's marquee investment in advancing understanding and developing practical solutions to our era's pressing environmental problems. Woods scholars team with other researchers, governments, companies, and NGOs to build bridges from research to action to address challenges in climate, health, food, water, oceans, and biodiversity. Looking forward, we in the Woods Institute are excited to be working with colleagues from across the university as a founding pillar in Stanford's bold new school, focused on climate and sustainability. I'm really excited about today's session, tackling where America is on climate change. America in One Room opens a unique window on public opinion and its evolution. Today, we'll have a chance to learn about the approach as well as the latest results on climate and energy. The plan for the next 90 minutes is that we'll tackle the topic from three directions. First, we'll hear an overview from the leaders and founders of America in One Room, Larry Diamond, Jim Fishkin, and Alice Su. Second, we'll touch base with Nicole Ardoin and Noah Diffenbaugh to connect public opinion on climate with the latest science. And finally, we'll turn to the politics with a conversation moderated by Pete Weber and featuring Congressman John Curtis and Ro Khanna. Because we have so much to cover, let me turn without further delay to America in One Room. Larry Diamond is Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, and a Bass University Fellow in Undergraduate Education at Stanford University. James Fishkin is the Director of the Center for Deliberative Democracy, Professor of Communication, and he holds the Janet M. Peck Chair in International Communication. Alice Su is the Associate Director of the Center for Deliberative Democracy. Larry, Jim, Alice, the floor is yours.
So I'm going to introduce the concept and say a few words about the experiment, and then Larry and Alice are going to discuss the more specific results. So I'm going to zip through these slides very fast. Deliberative polling focuses on an unusual question: what would the people think under good conditions for thinking about an issue? Now, those good conditions are balanced information, moderated small group deliberation, an opportunity for people to get their questions answered by competing and relevant experts in plenary sessions. We are dealing with random samples, representative samples of the public, stratified random samples, control groups who do not deliberate so that we can see the effects of deliberation. And we measure that we gather their opinions in confidential questionnaires on first contact and then at the end of the process. And that's for the both the treatment and the control groups. Now you might say, well, why not just do a poll? Why do we need all this stuff? And the problem is that on complicated issues like climate change and energy, the public has low levels of information. They are what's called rationally ignorant. If I have one vote in millions, why should I spend a lot of time thinking about complicated issues when my individual vote or voice will not have much effect? If you ask them survey questions, you may get what I call phantom opinions, or the Phil Converse at the University of Michigan called non-attitudes. That is, people never want to say they don't know, so they will almost at random pick an alternative, just as they did for the famous Public Affairs Act of 1975, which was used to collect opinions. But there were no opinions because it didn't exist. It was fictional. A third, so we don't want phantom opinions. We want real opinions as an input to the policy dialogue. And there's another problem. People, if they do start thinking about an issue, tend to communicate with people like them, consult news sources that are congenial. So it's communication with the like-minded. And as we're all in our filter bubbles, we may not ever hear the other side of the argument. And this is, of course, increasing our polarization. Now, we've done deliberative polls, as I described them, with random samples gathered to deliberate in depth, often for an entire weekend. We've done this more than 100 times in 34 countries in every inhabited continent. And we've actually done some on energy and climate issues. There were 8 deliberative polls in Texas with the Public Utility Commission, where the dramatic change in support for renewable energy, indeed being willing to pay for renewable energy, helped set off what has come to be known as the Texas wind boom. Also, there were dramatic and comparable increases in support for demand-side management or conservation. This began all the way back in 1996. I remember starting those in Texas. But national governments have used the deliberative poll to get public input that is representative and informed on their energy policies. Japan turned to our collaborators at Keio University and to the Center for Deliberative Democracy for public input about its energy choices after the Fukushima disaster. South Korea used deliberative polling to make a decision about whether to continue building or close down the construction of 2 nuclear reactors. It was a hard choice because the government was in principle anti-nuclear, but there were strong arguments for retaining the nuclear plants. Now, here's the experiment that we're talking about today. American One Room Climate and Energy with our collaborator Helena, which is a unique nonpartisan problem-solving organization, and the other entities there, California Forward and our Houston partners. And this was the largest nationally representative experiment in in-depth deliberation ever conducted. And by in-depth deliberation, I mean that people are talking to each other in depth in moderated small groups. We had nearly 1,000 participants and a control group of 671, and they were selected by NORC at the University of Chicago. Despite all the climate disasters, the control during this period in August to September to mid-September, with hurricanes and floods and fires and natural disasters, the control group changed hardly at all. But the participants changed in remarkable ways, and I think depolarizing ways on the issue of climate change, and my colleagues will explain that. So we had a nationally representative sample, and we had 72 substantive questions, a very elaborate agenda, and we are grateful indeed to some of the people who will be appearing here, because we had an advisory group, and Chris Field and Noah Diffenbach and other people from Woods helped us a great deal in developing the briefing materials and in vetting the issues to ensure that we were accurate and balanced. And we had other distinguished advisors from around the world. So we had 72 substantive questions. 68 out of the 72 changed significantly with deliberation. And 66 of the 68 changed significantly in the direction of doing more to combat climate change. Now, we'll present these results, but in addition, this is a preliminary report. We have so much more to cover because we have the transcriptions of all the small groups produced by the automated platform that Alice will describe later. And we're going to do automated text analysis and do lots of explanations of analyses to help explain why the people changed the way they did once they thought about the issue. So now I turn it over to Larry.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And I want to begin by echoing your words of appreciation to the Woods Institute, most of all to Chris Field, to his faculty colleagues, including Nicole Diffenbach and Nicole Ardoin, and to the amazing staff of the Woods Institute who do such great work and have put on this really incredible event. I'll just begin. You've already headlined our results, Jim, and the fact that they're hopeful, they're encouraging. If our very substantial audience has kind of been disappointed with what's come out of Glasgow and the general pace of policy change among the major greenhouse gas emitting countries of the world, not least the United States, I do want to say I think there's hope in these results, and that if we can ponder what kinds of arguments and processes led to the very substantial changes that we found among our nearly 1,000 deliberators in this online survey, I think we can make very significant progress in changing public opinion and changing public policy in the United States. So let's begin with general attitudes. Do Americans believe that rising temperatures are caused by human activities that emit greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, which trap heat in the atmosphere and warm the climate? 2/3 of our sample before they deliberated agreed with that, but as you can see, it varied dramatically by political party. And the pattern here is always Democrats are always most in agreement with analyses and policies that take the climate change threat very seriously and want to do far-reaching things to address it. Independents are in the middle and Republicans trail. That's the invariant pattern by party. And here on this general question, Democrats were already more than 9 in 10 in agreement with this kind of macro perspective. Independents, as you can see, increased by 14 percentage points to 3/4 agreement. And the big story here, which you're going to see in slide after slide on so many, not all, but so many of our items, is that Republicans moved by about 20 percentage points. And the characteristic pattern on many of our items is that the people in our sample who identified as Republicans moved from about 1/3 in agreement to a modest majority in agreement, both on the analysis side and, as you'll see, on a number of policy approaches. Next slide. On the general idea, again, a kind of macro perspective that we should take serious action to reduce greenhouse gases, or we're risking our children's future. Again, overall, about a 15 percentage point increase, nearly 20 percentage points among independents, and the same kind of characteristic change. Republicans went from 36% to actually one of the stronger majorities we saw among Republicans on these items, 57% agreeing that this was really vital to the future of our children. Next slide. The idea that, again, a kind of macro perspective, but zeroing in a little bit more, that taking actions means getting to net zero, that humans must stop adding to the total amount of climate heating gases in the atmosphere if we're going to arrest the rise in global temperatures. Again, about a 12-point increase, the total sample, to 3/4 agreeing with that. Independents increased in their perspective by 21 points. Democrats hardly changed at all, but here's the characteristic pattern again. Republicans went from 35% agreement to 55% agreement. Next slide. Failure to address these issues. This is about as powerful a statement as we could make. Failure to address these issues will threaten human life on Earth. Interestingly, Republicans and independents were kind of already coming in a little bit more inclined to agree with that. Republicans again increased to 55%. But here is what I think is one of the most stunning changes in the survey. Independents, who kind of are in the middle ideologically as well as politically, went from about 2/3 agreeing with this to 94%, the exact same percentage as Democrats. Next slide. Now, what about working with other countries? The US should work with other like-minded countries to adopt strong policies to achieve net zero. This went from 64% overall to 81%, one of the highest finishers among general policy orientations. Democrats actually improved statistically by quite a significant margin, 9 percentage points, similar increase among independents. And I think this may have been the single biggest increase in percentage points that we saw among Republicans. Republicans went from 37% agreeing that we need to work with other like-minded nations to get to a net zero global economy to 2/3 agreeing with this. Next slide. What about eliminating greenhouse emissions from coal? You know, when you start getting specific, as you'll see in a minute, Republicans become a little bit more wary, but they, in the end, were not wary about coal relative to their general policy orientation. Republicans went from 29% only agreeing with eliminating coal as soon as possible to 53%. That's kind of the modal number that they wound up with. Democrats increased slightly, and as you can see, independents increased in agreement on that count by 20 percentage points. Next slide. Republicans were significantly more cautious about eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from oil by no later than 2050. Our total sample wound up at about 2/3 agreement with this, as did independents, who increased by 17 percentage points. Democrats increased slightly. Republicans increased, but only to 42% agreement. Next slide. And a little bit more readiness to try to eliminate the use of fossil fuels in the production of cement and steel. That wound up at 82%. Independents increased dramatically by 25 percentage points to 85%. And Republicans increased 20 percentage points to their kind of modal modest majority on these items of about 54%. Next slide. And there was, interestingly, an increase in a willingness to cut some slack for a very specific form of production of pharmaceuticals that now make use of fossil fuels in the production process. The increase in willingness to allow fossil fuels to be used beyond a transition period to net zero for this purpose increased by 18 percentage points overall and by 24 percentage points among Republicans. Next slide. The US should eliminate the use of fossil fuels in the generation of electricity as soon as possible. Republicans did not rise to majority support on that, but they did increase by 13 percentage points to, you know, a substantial minority, 44%. Democrats were overwhelmingly in favor, independents 2/3. Next slide. And finally, the US should enact standards for utilities that limit the amount of greenhouse gases emitted during the production of electricity. 3/4 wound up agreeing with that. And again, a huge 24-point increase among Republicans to 56%. I'm now going to turn it over to Alice Su, who's going to talk about our findings on alternative energy.
Wonderful, thank you. And echoing all the thank yous and sentiments from both of our colleagues here, really grateful for the Woods Institute for hosting this webinar for us. As Larry and Jim have pointed out, the results for this deliberative poll have been very striking. And looking into alternative energy, we find differences, as you can see, by party, and with the sentiment of eliminating the sale of new gas and diesel-powered cars and trucks by 2035, differentiated. But if we go on to the next slide, you'll actually see that there is growing sentiment across all parties to expand financial incentives to have vehicle manufacturers and consumers accelerate development of adoption of electric cars and trucks. So even though, they may not want to switch over or eliminate gas-powered vehicles immediately, there is a lot of interest in expanding those incentives to allow people to actually be able to have the option to adopt if they can sooner than later. And furthermore, on the next slide about alternative energy, the solar energy adoption is extremely high, as you can see, across party lines, with increases, even though they were very high to begin with, in terms of whether the country should accelerate solar energy. And on the next slide, we talk about biofuels. We saw this huge increase among Republicans. And just as Larry had said, when we get down to some of the details about different types of energy and different types of policy, we see people considering each policy differently and how they want to expand and invest in new forms of energy. So there isn't a blanket trend perhaps, but as we go down to different specific types of forms of energy, we see different types of support across party. And obviously looking at the overall, there is an overwhelming majority supporting newer investments like in biofuels. And on the next slide, we talk about new generation nuclear. Oh, this is about the fossil fuels and the continued use of fossil fuels past 2050, coupled with carbon capture. You see increases across the board, more increase in terms of percentage and support among Republicans, but still, past 50%, close to 60% among Democrats on the issue of continued use of fossil fuels. So they see that there are certain cases and certain situations for which fossil fuels should be continued to be in use, along with carbon capture. And the next slide we have is about new generation nuclear. And this had overwhelming support, really, and the greatest increase among independents. And in the discussions, we saw people really struggling with trying to understand nuclear because it is complex, and trying to figure out, under what situations and under what circumstances should we consider nuclear. And with new generation nuclear, and understanding that it does minimize waste and safety risk, there was greater support for this form of energy. And in this last slide here, I wanted to share a bit more, as Jim noted, all of our, this whole deliberation on American One Room, Climate and Energy was used using the Stanford Online Deliberation Platform. It is an automated platform in the sense that there were no human moderators in the small groups. So for the close to 1,000 people that were participating in September in this event, they were broken up into small groups, over 100 small groups, randomly assigned. And the platform has been designed based on deliberative polling methods of moderation, which means there's a speaking queue, just as you would raise your hand in a small group discussion, the platform has a queue for people to speak. People can only speak for a certain amount of time, so people can't take over like us in this webinar. There's a timed agenda, as normal moderators would do, in each part, sectioning off how much time and can be used for discussion. We have AI software that tracks offensive language. We have features that nudges people to talk if they haven't already, or having different ways, innovative ways of nudging individuals, because everything is done online, and we can actually nudge individuals rather than stopping a conversation and making anyone feel uncomfortable to contribute in the discussion. And allowing for a very robust discussion with pros and cons in the agenda, allowing for people to share whether enough pros and cons have been discussed in the small groups itself. And it allows for a question development phase where questions are developed as a group, and they rank questions to see which questions they want to pose in a plenary session to experts and policymakers. So the platform itself looks and feel actually very close to Zoom and Google Meet or other types of conference meeting services that are web-based these days. But the back end of it really provides all the unique aspects that our team has been really working with. As Jim noted, we have real-time analytics, real-time transcription, and we're able to dive very deeply to understand what participants are saying at what point, what arguments they're making. So not only do we have all of this rich survey data about how people are feeling towards certain policy options, but we can tell people why and what the reasons are behind those opinions. And before we turn it over, just to share on our platform, not only have we done the event in September nationally in the US, but throughout the last couple of years, we've done events nationally in Chile, in Canada, here on the Stanford campus with faculty and students, and also with young people nationally as well with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So it's been a very fruitful platform, and we hope that we can share more of it with all of you here today at some point. And now I will turn it back to Jim Fishkin.
Oh, well, I think I should turn it back. Thank you, Alice. And we should say that the online platform is a collaboration with Ashish Goel from Management Science and Engineering and his crowdsourced democracy team. And it's their technology that has allowed us to do this. So I just wanted to recognize that. But I think Chris is the moderator at this point.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jim and Alice and Larry. We'll spend just a couple minutes on questions from the audience before switching over to talking with a little of the science behind these issues. And let me start with a question from Rich Rippon. Says, could you talk a little bit more about how participants were selected to take part, or point to online information that goes into more detail on that?
Well, look, the NORC, the University of Chicago, is one of the premier public opinion outfits in the world, and they maintain a continuous probability-based national panel, and they sampled from that national panel of about 25,000 to produce our representative sample of participants and a separate control group. And so they did the recruiting. They compensated the participants for their time. They actually had a concierge process where each participant had a concierge to make sure that any problems that they faced, whether any hardships that they faced, any internet connectivity problems they faced, did they need childcare, did they need any assistance at all? So the people they selected in the stratified random sample from the panel were the ones who participated. We had a very high rate of participation, and they matched up to the control group. And as I say, the control group changed hardly at all, because just seeing things on TV, no matter what the disasters, doesn't seem to affect opinion in the way that discussion does.
Great, thank you. There were a bunch of questions that really asked for your opinions, but I do want to ask a couple of those. This one is from Linda Salman. The question is, how can these results be achieved at scale outside the research environment? Any recommendations about process, protocol, messengers, organizations?
Well, that's why we developed the automated moderator. It was originally developed to bring deliberation to scale. And Alice had the insight that, well, we could put it inside the deliberative poll and test and develop it. And she's done that in the various places around the world. But we intend to bring the same deliberations to scale when we do, or to larger scale, each time when we have a national deliberation, we have the briefing materials that can be used for lots of other people. And Alice is leading a coalition with the Haas Center that has, in principle, 14 universities so far. And we think we're going to have universities across the country. We're going to have civic groups. We're going to start recruiting in other ways, maybe with a social media partner. See, we know a lot about the people who participate when they participate, and we may well ask them for references to other people. So we'd like to grow the deliberations organically to make this a more evident part of American life. Because when people deliberate, they become more mutually respectful. They become more informed. They become more public spirited. So we think there are benefits to the larger population. But the deliberative poll, distinguished from the deliberative scaling, are they're two different things. The deliberative poll, we need a good sample. The deliberative scaling, we want to spread the experience.
That's great. Let me ask one more question of this group, and then we'll turn to the scientists for some interpretation. So there are many questions along the theme of this one from Micah Weinberg. What do you think accounts for the massive changes in attitudes among Republicans? Are they simply sheltered from good information here, given their political and social networks, or something else?
Well, if you're in your filter bubble and you get information you disagree with, it can backfire. But if you can be in a discussion, a mutually civil discussion, people open up to the other side. And we found this also with a face-to-face America in One Room, which had opinion changes on the immigration issue, which is also a hot issue, that was up to about 40 points among Republicans, but also up to about 40 points among Democrats on the most expensive redistributive proposals. So it's not just Republicans who change, it's people who haven't heard the other side of the argument who change. But they can't just hear it, they have to engage in a discussion about it. And they learn to take up the perspective of other people in the discussion. And that's sort of the magic of deliberation, which I'm so delighted that I blundered into some decades ago. And we've been working on it since. And I have now the greatest group of collaborators I've ever had.
Oh, thanks so much. So we're going to turn now to some science commentary on this, and we'll have a chance to swing back and reconnect with Jim and Alice and Larry. So now we'll turn to Nicole Ardoin and Noah Diffenbaugh. Nicole is the director of the Emmett Interdisciplinary Program in Environmental Resources, Associate Professor of Education and Senior Fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. Noah is the Kara J. Foundation Professor and Kimmelman Family Senior Fellow in Earth System Science and a Senior Fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute. And let me just kind of open it up and ask both of you whether the polling resonates with you in terms of what you're seeing in opinions and where you think the country is and needs to go.
Nicole, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I mean, I'll say my initial impressions are actually in terms of the process, and I really appreciate Jim's initial comments there. What really struck me is, as someone who works in behavioral science and also in education and community engagement, a lot of what I'm seeing in my world really is along the civic engagement perspective, in that what we see is that when people engage with each other in these challenging issues in meaningful ways, they are much more likely to see each other as colleagues and as community members working toward a more positive, thriving future, rather than as people who are sitting on opposite sides of the aisle or on opposite sides of issues. And so I think that some of the questions really got to the heart of this, that we see each other as working toward wanting a better place for our children, a better place for jobs, a better thriving environment for all of us when we sit down and actually listen to each other. So I'm happy to share some more comments on that shortly, but really that's what I see when we think about not just information, but really engaging in dialogue as an actual action within our own communities. So I was really heartened by some of these findings that we're just hearing about today.
Well, certainly as an instructor myself, I found the changes in opinion as a result of the dialogue to be truly overwhelming. I think I've never had that impact on a group of students, so I should just let them talk themselves. No.
Yeah, I think similarly, and even the experience of being a panelist during the process and kind of observing the questions from the various groups and that discussion. I think that I agree. It very much highlights the potency of this particular process. And I think, what I really admire about that setup, and this gets to some of the questions in the Q&A, is that it's very much focused on deliberation with evidence, right? And so that process of the groups being able to deliberate, generate questions, and then interact with experts who are neutral, right? Who are not driving opinion one way or the other, but are just responding to the questions as they arise, I think is, that's among the highlights for me.
I wonder, Noah, if you could follow up with a couple comments on the questions that were posed and whether in general your sense is that the affirmative on those questions is what we need to do to have an appropriate, affordable approach to tackling climate change.
Yeah, I think I do. I think that I was very impressed during the event with how focused the groups were on understanding climate change and understanding the implications of different possible actions, as opposed to advocating for particular positions. And so I think that the process was able to focus on that in terms of the panelists and having experts in a range of dimensions of the problem, particularly solutions-oriented dimensions of the challenge, I think was very helpful, so that the debate was able to truly be a debate of where there aren't not debating facts, but weighing different options. And I think that the process itself really helped to focus the discussion on that, as opposed to some other forums where the discussion becomes debates about facts that observed facts about the world that are then debated.
Great. And to close out this very brief session, let me turn back to Nicole and ask, now that we know this stuff and have seen these really dramatic evolutions in opinion, how as educators or as a civic society could we best use this information in order to come up with policies and strategies and approaches that move the needle on tackling climate change?
Thanks, Chris. That's a great question. It makes me think that, as someone in these kinds of settings often, and I'll note that I previously worked at WWF and with other nonprofit conservation organizations, and I still do in my own research, one of the biggest questions we often get from community members is, what can I actually do about these issues? What's an action I can take that will make a difference? And one of the challenges on that is that as an individual, we can feel relatively hopeless, or it can feel like our individual actions are meaningless in light of these really big challenges. And so one of the takeaways I see in these kinds of settings is that the dialogue itself can actually be an action. The dialogue itself is a place where we can make a difference in terms of having meaningful civil discourse with each other and thinking about our local context. So what is meaningful in our local community? What is meaningful with our neighbors and with our colleagues? So that to me is something that is a really great takeaway from this kind of process. So thinking about what's a step that we can take tomorrow when we wake up with our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues. To me, that suggests that that's actually an action that is something in light of even these really overwhelming problems that we can make a difference just by even talking to people about local changes.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really inspiring way to close this segment. And now I want to turn it over to the politics of how we really make it happen. And this part is going to be led by Pete Weber. Pete's a business and public sector leader, is vice president of FMC Corporation, CEO of Tech Knowledge, and CEO of Riverbend International. He's also co-chair emeritus of California Forward, a member of the board of California Competes, and a senior advisor to the Center for Deliberative Democracy at Stanford. Pete.
Chris, thank you so much. And thanks to the Woods Institute for hosting this. I also want to thank Jim Fishkin and Larry Diamond and Alice Sue for leading this process through the Stanford Center for Deliberative Democracy. I also want to thank Representatives Ro Khanna and John Curtis for joining us today. I think they're on. Justin, is that correct? I see Representative Khanna. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you, Pete?
Great. And we should be joined shortly by Representative John Curtis. So while we're doing that, let me briefly introduce Representative Ro Khanna, who probably doesn't need much introduction for those of you from Stanford, because he used to teach economics at Stanford before he went to the Congress in 2017. And where he now serves as a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform and chairs the Oversight Environmental Subcommittee. Welcome, Representative Khanna. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And we're still waiting for Representative Curtis, who may be joining us a little bit late. I understand, Representative Khanna, that there's a vote that is in process or about to be taken. And so he may be, Representative Curtis may be a little bit late. So let me start with you, Representative Khanna. I'm going to point out that there were some questions on Republican perceptions of the impacts on climate change and on the association of climate change with human activity, where there were very substantial swings in the decisions, in the attitudes from Republicans on both of those questions. When poll participants were asked if they were worried about climate change before and after deliberation, there was a swing of 19 percentage points in the direction of expressing greater concern, with 56% of Republicans saying they were worried. When asked if they felt that rising temperatures were a result of human activity, again, there was a swing of 19 percentage points towards agreement, with 54% of Republicans saying yes after deliberation. So let me get a reaction from you on that, Congressman Khanna. Were you surprised to see those results?
I was encouraged. I wasn't surprised, but let me just start out by thanking you for inviting me. I've been a longtime admirer of James Fishkin's work since I was a student with Bruce Ackerman in law school, and of Larry Diamond's work. In fact, I cite both Fishkin and Diamond's work on the One America town halls they've done and the impact they had. And just 2 lines on that. It's forthcoming book, Dignity in the Digital Age, and Habermas read the chapter and blurbed it, so he's aware of your extraordinary contributions. I think it's not just the work and surprise on the climate stuff is not just about what the results are. First of all, I would defend the process of having deliberation with expert opinion as having guiding it as the right model for democracy, as a matter of first principles, regardless of which way it ends up. Second, I would say one of the problems that we have is when we say you need to follow the science and just assume that the scientists are right, as if we're lecturing people, and as if you can have scientific experts determine in a democracy the right view, and that it's offensive to many people. I think it's a much better way is to get people participating themselves in language that they would choose, understanding a lot of times that the dispute isn't actually about science. The dispute is about values. The question is, what is our tolerance for risk? What is our tolerance in terms of the trade-offs between the economy, short-term and long-term? And I think the deliberative process recognizes the values distinctions and doesn't make people feel like they're inferior and that somehow everyone has to follow, quote unquote, the science. And so I think it's about respecting people in the process. And then I think you see that when you do that, there is room for common ground and room for progress. And Representative Curtis, I hope you'll join, has been a great supporter of climate in the House. So it shows that there can be cross examples of this taking place. And I would hope that we could do these type of forums across the country. It would do tremendous amount to improve the quality of our democracy. And I know James Fishkin and Larry Diamond are trying to do that. It's one of the best things we could do for modern democracy.
Thank you, Representative Khanna, and we are headed in that direction. I like you, I welcome that. There was a question raised that about net zero. When asked if they thought in order to stop the increase in global temperatures, humans must stop adding to the amount of climate heating gases in the atmosphere. In other words, when asked if we should strive to get to net zero, without putting a timeline on, 75% of participants said yes, including 54% of Republicans and 78% of independents. Give me your reaction to that.
Again, I think it shows that there's room for common ground. I think the difficult questions are on when you put a timeline, when you put costs, when you put a sense of what are the challenges for those in fossil fuel dependent states. And that is why I think a lot of these, again, to repeat what I said a bit earlier, a lot of these questions are values questions, right? So I believe that there's probably more consensus on the science, and then the real debates are about whether this is going to be good for job creation, whether this is going to be good for the economy. What do we need to do? How serious is the risk? Thomas Hobbes had this great line that if it was in a person's interest to deny that a triangle had 3 sides, they would deny that a triangle had 3 sides. And so my view is what the deliberation process does is allow for the values disputes to be resolved in a way that recognizes the dignity of every individual, that doesn't make people feel like we're too smart or some are smarter than others, and recognizes that the deliberative process is the best process that we have as imperfect human beings to approach the truth, and at least the truth of what makes legitimate good policy. And so there's a Matt Russell who did this deliberation process with farmers in Iowa in church basements, and after that realized that a lot of farmers were for a good environmental policy. So I'm encouraged by the results, not surprised by them. I think they show, for those of us who believe deeply as I do in climate policy, a degree of wanting to have humility, not hectoring and lecturing the American public, but sort of empowering them to participate from their value orientation in a conversation.
Thank you. And I'm going to come back to some of those comments a little bit later, because I think you're absolutely right that issues of timeline and costs and the challenges for communities that currently depend on fossil fuels as a means of generating tax revenue to provide services to the residents are huge questions that need to be addressed. I have a two-part question for you. That relates to the technology pathways that participants favored. And you've had a chance to take a look at the results. As a Californian, did it come as a surprise to you to learn that a representative sampling of Californians before and after deliberation favored a mixed technology or diversified technology pathway to net zero, meaning a pathway that includes not just renewables, but also new generation nuclear, carbon capture, use and sequestration, hydrogen, and so on?
It didn't surprise me. I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change also believes that there has to be a mix. There has to be a mix of nuclear, I think, is explicitly part of their recommendation. Now, the challenge with carbon capture is just that there hasn't been an economic way to do it so far. I mean, the only economic way that has happened, and I think there are 12 carbon capture projects in the United States, and the only economic way that has happened is if it's used for enhanced oil refinement, which makes it actually carbon positive. And there's not a clear sense of otherwise, how do you put it in the ground and keep it in the ground? So my sense is if you have deliberation forums with all of the current information about carbon capture storage, there would probably be some healthy skepticism about that, at least as currently being implemented. But overall, to say that there has to be a diversified mix, I think is actually consistent with what the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change says.
Thank you. And Representative Khanna, you probably have been already in touch with the people at Lawrence Livermore Lab. They participated as experts in this field, and they had some very encouraging news for us on the subject of carbon capture, use and sequestration and its implications for the US and for California in particular. But I see that Representative Curtis has now been able to join us. Thank you, Representative Curtis. I know you probably had to sprint from taking a vote to be with us. Representative Curtis has served in the House of Representatives also since 2017. He represents a large swath of Utah, from Salt Lake all the way to the border with Arizona. He serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and chairs the Conservative Climate Caucus. Welcome, Representative Curtis. We're delighted you can join us.
Thank you for being patient with me. I'm really pleased to join you.
So, we were just discussing with Representative Khanna that the deliberating group, overwhelmingly supported the idea that we need a mixed technology pathway that includes all possible options. And it was actually, frankly, to me, a shock to learn that even before deliberation, 57% of Californians supported new generation nuclear. And that after deliberation, it was 73%, which is higher than the state of Texas. And so, there were a lot of surprises in this whole thing. Support for this diversified pathway to net zero went across party lines, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Texans, Californians. What's your reaction to that, Congressman Curtis?
Well, I'm really pleased to hear that. And I'll tell you why. Is I'm convinced that unless we have a broad base, we're really putting our chance of success at risk. And let me tell you what I mean by that. For instance, if we're 100% reliant on renewables and we don't figure out storage, then we're going to have a problem reaching our goals. If we're 100% reliant on something else, right, and that falls through, let's say it's 100% reliant on nuclear, and we don't have the success we hope to have there, then we don't reach our goals. So I really think the best way is to be almost technology agnostic and say, look, let's put all these great ideas out there. Let's see which ones develop. And we're likely going to need all of them, and maybe some even yet that haven't come to mind in order to reach our goals.
Thank you. And let me follow up with a couple of other questions. And this won't probably come as much of a surprise to either one of you, but there was a strong support following deliberation. 82% of participants, including 70% of Republicans, and not surprisingly, 85% of Californians and 89% of Texans supported investment in the accelerated expansion of our electricity grid, and specifically expansion of a secure and reliable electricity grid. So do you think, Congressman Curtis, that the recently passed Infrastructure Act will help address this issue?
Well, yes, in a sense, but I think the passage also points out some problems. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If putting charging stations, which as I understand it, is one of the goals of the legislation out around the United States, is an important thing. We have the grid to get to those charging stations, right? And if we have the grid, do we have the electricity? So I think in one sense, it will help because there's funding for it, but in another sense, we're going to really stretch our current grid. If we want to electrify as many things as people want to electrify, I think we've got some stretching to do.
Yeah, let me switch directions for a minute, because much of our discussion so far has been about technology and technology pathways. But we haven't said yet a lot about some of the political and policy challenges. And I have to tell you, having observed many of the deliberations, people generally thought of the technological challenges as daunting, but they thought the political and policy challenges were even more so. Okay, they were frankly quite skeptical that we were going to be able to resolve those, the political gridlock that currently exists in America. I'm going to do a lightning round of questions, all of which receive support from at least 78% of poll participants, to see if you agree or disagree with what poll participants have to say. So these are essentially agree or disagree questions. But if you do feel like you want to disagree, please feel free or elaborate on any of these questions. So 88% of participants agreed that a transition plan should ensure a reliable and affordable source of energy for all Americans. Congressman Khanna, you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. Congressman Curtis.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Next question, 84% agreed that a transition plan should specify how the cost of transition will be reduced for low and middle income Americans. Do you agree or disagree with that, Representative Curtis?
Absolutely, yes. Agree.
Representative, okay.
Agree.
Congressman Khanna, agree. 78% agreed that the transition plan should specify how states, communities, and families that currently depend on tax revenues from the fossil fuel industry should be assisted in the transition to other sources of tax revenues. Representative Khanna, you touched on that earlier in your comments. You agree or disagree?
I agree. I strongly agree.
Okay, we're talking about, not only places like West Virginia and, but places, in California, like Kern County, or, places like North Dakota, New Mexico, et cetera. Representative Curtis, you agree with that?
In fact, I represent a county called Carbon County. And firsthand how much work we have to do in places like this. Absolutely, yes.
Okay. 84% agreed that the transition plan should minimize impacts on U.S. economic competitiveness, in particular job impacts for Americans. Representative Curtis?
I agree. And I think actually there's a path forward that doesn't have to compromise that economic viability as well.
Okay, I want to come back and ask you about that in a few minutes. So Representative Khanna, how about you? You agree with that? Okay. 80% agreed that US policies to reduce greenhouse gases should ensure we don't simply shift emission producing activities to nations with lower emission standards than our own. Representative Khanna
I agree.
and Representative Curtis.
2 thumbs up. Yes.
Okay. 81% agreed that the US should work with other like-minded nations to adopt strong policies to encourage all nations to contribute to a net zero economy. Representative Curtis.
I think he agreed.
Do you need me to repeat the question? 81% agreed that the US should work with other like-minded nations to adopt strong policies to encourage all nations to contribute to a net zero economy.
I agree.
Okay, Representative Khanna.
I agree.
Okay, well, look, I'm thrilled with this level of concurrence, right? So just before you came on board, Representative Curtis, Representative Khanna was talking about, how we ought to spread deliberative polling across the nation to many places. Maybe we need to take it to Washington, D.C. I mean, if there's this much concurrence, then why is it that we can't come together? And that's a rhetorical question. I don't, expect you to answer it right now. Before we do that, and this may have something to do, Representative Curtis, with your idea about how to avoid this problem of reducing economic competitiveness. But the question that arose during the deliberative poll that elicited the highest number of "I don't know" responses was on carbon pricing. Specifically, the question was, should the US government put in a uniform carbon pricing system across the nation? But after deliberation, when poll participants understood that a carbon pricing scheme could be accompanied with a carbon dividend to help offset transition costs for low and middle income Americans, and that a carbon border adjustment mechanism could help protect American workers, support for carbon pricing increased to 57%, and even higher than that in both Texas and California, which we oversampled. So Representative Curtis, give me your reaction to that and tell me if that's partly what you had in mind when you said there is a way to prevent that from happening.
It's actually not what I had in mind. And let me just tell you, 2 concerns about a carbon tax. And ironically, the same thing that moved voters to be more positive are the things that are moving me to be more negative. And let me explain what I mean by that. Almost zero confidence in the federal government's ability to collect revenue and redistribute it. I think that that's a nightmare, and I don't think the federal government can be trusted. I also have not seen any plan that genuinely holds China accountable in the border tax adjustment. There's too many ways for China to cheat. There's too many categories that are not included. So I'm open to, and I know a lot of people like to talk about this concept, and I think it's a great discussion to have, and I think it's a good discussion to have as a parallel path to other solutions. But I haven't got my arms around those 2 problems.
Representative Khanna, talk to us about carbon pricing. How do you feel about it?
Sure. And then I unfortunately have to go, but let me just say this. I mean, I am for a carbon price as long as it doesn't hurt the working class and the middle class. So there are proposals of a fee and dividend or ways of getting it compensated for the working class. But what I'm not for is a type of carbon tax that would end up hurting the working class and middle class, as you saw the yellow vest jacket phenomena in France. So we have to be very careful how we structure any carbon price. I just end by saying, I think if you have more people like John Curtis, I disagree with him on a number of issues, but he's a thoughtful person who comes to Congress with a sense of wanting to engage in reasoned dialogue. He's taken a bold position in his party on climate. I think the country would work a lot better. I think the challenge is, when you don't have people in Congress all committed to necessarily deliberation. So I applaud him for his view. Over the long run, I'm confident in our democracy, but obviously in the short term, we have many challenges.
So Representative Khanna, if I can just take one more minute of your time before you leave. what do you see as possible next steps? I appreciate your optimism, but you also know we're up against the clock. We need to act. And so what can be done, and specifically I'm talking inside the Beltway, to try to move this forward?
Well, I'd say two things. One, what we're trying to do as a nation, I think, is historically unprecedented. We're trying to become the first multiracial, truly democracy in the world. And so the idea that this is going to be some easy process, I think, is naive. And there are deep conversations in this country about how communities will fit into this American story, questions of identity. And there's a messy democracy to figure that out. But England, Canada, Australia, they're almost 80-some% white. We're at 60% white, non-Hispanic, and a tremendous diversity. So the project of we're engaged in is very difficult. I think what would help on climate is having less sort of condescension or moral arrogance, or saying I have the right way, and if you don't do it my way, you're sort of a Luddite, or you don't understand science. I think it's having respect for people, understanding where they're coming from, giving them a platform, having conversations, not coming with sort of immediate judgment, and then having dialogue and building a broader consensus in a way I think that Representative Curtis has tried to do on his side of the aisle.
Sounds like a deliberative poll. So we'll follow up with you on that. That might be an opportunity for us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for your kind words, Representative. We'll work together. We'll find some answers.
Sounds good. Take care.
Let me just take a couple more minutes of your time, and then I want to take some questions that came up from the chat. Do you have some time?
I do. I'm actually really good on this side. It was the front side that was a little hard for me, so I'm super good as long as you need me.
Okay. So there were questions that were raised in the poll about not just the what, but also the how should we do it and who should do it, right? And so on the question of who should do it, there was actually very little support across party lines for the idea of a federal emergency and mandates coming down from Washington, D.C. There was even less support for letting the private sector do its own thing and get the government out of the way. However, there was the poll participants were very strongly supportive of a public-private approach where the federal government sets broad goals and policies, but allows lots of flexibility to the states to implement and to reach those goals based on their unique set of assets and values, and also encourages the private sector to invest and innovate. And mostly the private sector does that with policy predictability. Absent policy predictability, that's very hard to do, at least at the pace at which we need to make progress. So give me your reaction to that.
I think they're very wise, the people who give you that answer. It is a delicate financing between these two entities, right? Between government and private sector. You mentioned predictability. We can mess up predictability very easily on the government level. If we put an incentive out there for 12 months, that's not going to do any good, right? And if people are worried, for instance, tax changes are going to come in a year, then we can really mess this up. Likewise, by putting the right incentives out there under the right conditions, let's look at what happened with solar. We took solar from something that couldn't be afforded. The only people that would do it were people that wanted to do it because they wanted to be green, but you certainly didn't do it because it was a low-cost provider. And today it's the low-cost provider. And that's, I think, a wonderful example of government kind of putting a target out there, setting some incentives out there, and letting the free market then do its thing. And I'm absolutely convinced that that's a powerful combination. And what we have to, on our side, government, we have to be careful that we don't mess that up, right? That we don't add in a level of unpredictability, that we don't, I think we should be a little bit more agnostic into what we're incentivizing, actually. Let the free market decide. So if we put out there incentives for reducing carbon, or if we put out incentives through reducing carbon this way, I think we're going to we're going to limit that free market. So I think we've got to put incentives out there and figure out how to reward those and be agnostic to the way they get there.
So you said that the people doing the deliberation were very smart, and I think they were really thoughtful. I was just blown away. I was very, very impressed. So let me just ask a follow-up question, which was, they were keenly aware of the fact that this transition is not going to happen overnight. I mean, it's going to take a long time. And they were greatly concerned about predictability and stability for a transition plan over that extended period of time. They didn't see that happening, through executive orders. They didn't see it happening, as a result of our 2 and 4 year election cycles. They saw a lot of zigzags and so on. And so what they did favor, by fairly strong majority, 70% agreed that the president and the Congress should develop a long-term budget that shows how much the transition will cost, how the funding will be provided, and who will pay. Now, clearly, if you're going to do a 30-year budget, it needs to be nimble and flexible and adaptable based on changing circumstances, technology developments, and other factors. But give me a reaction to that. Is that something that can even be contemplated in Washington?
I totally agree that's the right answer. And let me tell you why. And I'm not sure if this is what your participants were thinking, but this is my Washington, D.C. mind saying to me, anything short of that, and we're just shooting a shotgun over here, and then over here, and then over here, and over here, right? So we're putting in charging stations, but we don't have the grid to support it. Or we're spending money on this, but it's not leading to a long-term objective. I've not heard anybody in Washington, D.C. state what is the long-term objective. To me, it's reduce worldwide greenhouse gas emissions, right? Well, too often it's electrify, or too often it's it's something that is a path that's on the path to the end goal. But I really think we should target that end goal. And if I'm wrong, then somebody can state what it is. Let's state what it is as a nation. This is our end goal. This is exactly how we're going to get there. And this is how we'll know when we've arrived. And you're right. And who's going to pay for it? What's it going to cost? Some of those questions in transition are really powerful, right? Are we really okay quadrupling low-income people's utility bill? I don't think we are. Right. So how do we pay for it? And I think we're not asking a lot of these really important questions.
So what I hear you saying is we need a long-term comprehensive plan that addresses our sustainability objectives and also our economic objectives. That is to say, so that people aren't adversely, I should say social, economic and social objectives, so that people aren't adversely impacted in ways that they just can't contend.
And what I would add to that is, let's start with the end in mind. What is our goal?
Right.
Instead of just starting out and saying, well, let's reduce carbon. That's not good enough, right? Like, what is the goal? The goal is worldwide. It's not the United States greenhouse gas emissions. It's worldwide greenhouse gas emissions.
So go ahead.
What's going to take us there? And what's it going to cost? And how are we going to do it? And how long is it going to take us to do it?
Okay, so I hear you saying, we need a goal, very specifically defined goal, set of goals, perhaps, that address not only the sustainability issues, but also the economic and social equity issues, and that also address, issues such as reliability of energy. Sustainability, reliability, affordability, all of those things have to be in the mix, and they have to be part of a comprehensive approach.
We're going to see in Europe this winter what happens when you don't do that. You're going to have costs doubling, tripling, quadrupling for people who can't afford to pay it, and you're going to have blackouts. And it's because they didn't start with the end in mind.
So I'm gonna just we've got time for a couple of audience questions, and let me see if I can pull them up. Let me see. There was a question. I'm curious why you didn't deliberate on climate and economy, since most regular folks are concerned about the impact of taking action on the former wrecking the latter. Energy for most people can be comparatively abstract. So we've been talking about that. There, and a couple of statistics might be helpful. More than 53% of American households earn less than $60,000. 50% of seniors aged more than 65 live on incomes of $27,400 per year or less. The average savings, the median savings of Americans is less than $5,000. So these are people who can just go out and buy a Tesla. And these are people for whom an increase in electricity costs or in fuel costs are a very big deal. So, just listening to the deliberations, my conclusion was that support for action on climate change was strong, a mile wide, but shallow to the extent that, provided that it doesn't really, cripple my life. So let me have your thoughts on that.
Well, it's right. The polling tells us that, when you actually, ask people if they're willing to do these things and then put a dollar amount on it, it doesn't go very deep, right? And that's why figuring out how to do this without it being a major burden on the economy is essential. And I think we can do it, but we're not on the current trajectory to do that. I was just in Scotland for COP, and because they're dependent on wind, and the wind's not blowing, they're importing natural gas, and natural gas has become very expensive. They have seen a quadrupling of their utility prices in the last few months, a quadrupling. A woman I heard of had a small apartment. She was paying $1,000 a month to heat it. That's not acceptable, right? We've got to figure out how to avoid that. And by the way, I think we can.
There's a question in the chat. Are there any solutions or technologies that you see as benefiting the economy / citizens that Republicans can get behind?
Yeah, I can. Boy, I could take your whole hour, but I'll just fire off some of them. We've talked about new nuclear. Imagine if we were able to iterate and get new nuclear down to be a low-cost leader, and then that's purchased by China, by India, right, by countries around the world. The number of U.S. jobs that would fuel are fantastic, right? And it would reduce carbon. So that's one of them. Fusion is out there. Hydrogen is out there. Battery storage is out there. Carbon sequestration, direct air capture, all of these things, if the US will lead on this and develop the technology that will be implemented around the world, there is massive economic benefit to the United States. And all of those things, in my opinion, are going to be needed to get us across the finish line.
What you're painting is a very hopeful picture that if we can lead in all of these technologies, we're going to come out of this transition as a really powerful force around the world. The question is, how do we bridge the gap between here and that hopeful future in a way that doesn't impair people's lives?
So let me give you a really good example. The Keystone Pipeline. So we shut down the Keystone Pipeline because we don't like fossil fuels, killing thousands of jobs. And then we say to Russia, please produce more oil. Like, that's what I mean by not having the end goal in mind. Right? That does not reach the end goal, right? Sure, we've got to decrease our dependency on fossil fuels, but you don't do it by shutting down US production and asking our enemies to make more. Let's work on carbon sequestration and carbon capture, right? And we've got a difficult path ahead, but we don't need to go on a fossil fuel diet today. As a matter of fact, fossil fuels are responsible for reducing more greenhouse gas emission in the last 10 years than every government program and the Green New Deal combined, as we've swapped out natural gas for coal. Well, why don't we swap out natural gas in China for coal, in Russia, in India, and we could reduce more greenhouse gas emissions than the Green New Deal. But instead, we're restricting our exports of these things.
Let me ask you one last question, because I want to come back to elaborate a little bit on your proposal to do the transition in a way that doesn't impact the American economy and American jobs.
Yeah, so we've kind of touched on that, but here's the reality. Look, if we'll double down on R&D, in carbon sequestration, in direct air capture, in new nuclear, in hydrogen, in fusion, in battery storage, every one of those categories will not only produce massive US jobs and prosperity for the United States, but quite frankly, we need those things to be successful to get to a carbon-free future, right? I don't think you cannot do it simply by building more windmills and solar farms. I mean, that's a piece of it, but we've got to have storage. Let's lead with US innovation and jobs. Instead, we're buying batteries from China. We're buying solar panels from China. That's what we've got to turn around. We've got to make that stuff right here in the United States and let USA prosper on it. And we'll do that by being the ones that develop the technology.
Representative Curtis, thank you so much. I can see why the people of Provo, Utah reelected you with 83% of the vote to be their mayor. So I don't leave us yet. If you can hang in for a couple of minutes, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Field, pardon me, who runs the Wood Institute at Stanford, and ask Chris if he wants to invite other panelists to join with him to ask some more questions or take audience questions or however you want to proceed. Chris, back to you.
Thank you so much, Pete, and thank you so much, Representative Curtis, for joining us. We have just a couple of minutes left, and before closing us out, I would like a chance to bring back the leaders of the Deliberative Democracy Project, Jim and Larry and Alice, as well as the scientists. And one thing I'd like to start off by doing, Representative Curtis, is asking if you have any questions for them. What's the information you'd most like to see?
So let me first of all compliment all of you. Pete and I met, I don't know when, Pete, and I immediately became a fan of your work and what you're doing. And just simply the fact that you're asking the questions about transition are so critical. I think, quite frankly, that's why people push back on this movement, is they feel like, wait, we're not asking enough questions. We're not being thoughtful enough about this. And I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I represent an area called Carbon County, and I've seen these very good people villainized. And right, they're the same people that allowed us to heat our homes and turn on our lights for many, many years. And the movement wants to villainize them. And I think too often we don't have the thoughtfulness that all of you have had and ask the questions you're asking. So I don't so much have a question as a compliment to all of you for the work you're doing.
Thanks so much.
Well, if I could return the compliment, I would say two things. Number one, generally, if we don't find ways to reduce our political polarization in the United States, our democracy is going to be doomed even before the planet melts. And secondly, I personally think this doesn't emerge from the survey. It just emerges from my own sense as a scholar of democracy, that quite possibly the single most important political development in recent years, giving hope that we can turn a corner on this, is the formation of the Conservative Climate Caucus and the broadening of the political commitment across party lines to find, as Congressman Curtis said, practical solutions to address this. So I'd just like to personally thank Congressman Curtis for his leadership on this. I can't emphasize enough how important I think it is.
Larry, that gives me goosebumps. Thank you for that very, very high compliment. I'll just say, you know, I get it. We've not been at the table as Republicans. Like, I can see that. But 74 of my House colleagues, without much prompting at all, joined this caucus that has as its first tenet that the climate's changing and man's had some influence on it. We're turning that corner, and we're coming with thoughtfulness, and we want a seat at that table. And let me give you some more good news, Larry. A number of my Democratic colleagues have embraced us, right? I mean, they're faced with a tough decision. Is like, well, do we complain that you weren't here, or do we embrace you and get down to work? I cannot tell you how many have embraced us and said, let's go to work. And they're very good men and women who, on both sides, who genuinely want to deal with this. And I'll also just say another thing is, I think sometimes we're not very good at patting ourselves on the back. We did pass the Energy Act of 2020 last year about this time. It's a substantial bipartisan effort. And so sometimes we fly right past these successes because we want more. And I think part of what we do make a mistake doing is not recognizing when we have worked well together.
Thank you.
May I jump in and just offer a quick comment, because I'd love to hear your advice. It's actually a comment on the question. Yeah, I think we agree that the clock is ticking, that, we need to prevent the harm that will otherwise, befall us if we don't act, and acting sooner is better than later. And so I cannot speak for Stanford, will not speak for Stanford, but I really want to ask you, and again, you don't have to answer this right now, to ask you to think about whether or not, some kind of deliberation, a process would work within Washington to try to bring Republicans to the table in a safe space, where people aren't using the tired narratives of the far right and the far left to try to damage each other, but really with a focus on trying to find solutions. So I'm curious you to think about that.
Yeah, I think that's my mission. What you've just explained is bringing my Republican colleagues further along. The whole purpose of the caucus is to get Republicans on their feet, comfortable talking about this. And once they're comfortable, I think you'll see the ideas just really flowing. Some of us have been uncomfortable talking about it, and therefore, instead of putting our ideas out there, we just tell everybody what we don't like. There are a host of good Republican conservative ideas that we need to be out there putting on the table to mix with our Democratic colleagues' ideas and let the best ideas, right, surface up. And more likely than not, what you'll find is not our ideas or their ideas, but the joined right ideas come together to be more powerful. And that's the whole purpose of the caucus, is to get Republicans ready for that.
Well, we're pretty much at time. I want to thank everybody for a really insightful, important, solutions-oriented conversation. Thank you so much, Representative Curtis, for joining us. Congratulations again to the Center for Deliberative Democracy, and thanks to Jim Fishkin, Larry Diamond, and Alice Sue for a wonderful presentation. Thanks to Nicole Ardoin and Noah Diffenbaugh for their input and incisive commentary. Thank you to our crack technical team at the Woods Institute, Molly Field, Athena Serapio, and Justin Warren. And finally, thanks to all of you in the audience for your interest, participation, and let me say leadership. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you at a Woods webinar in the future.